Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I'm going to have a concluding discussion on the tall whites based on Charles James Hall's books, the 5-volume edition, and this is kind of the last one. I want to make some additions and corrections here from my last lecture on this, which had a lot of very good information, and I misspoke in a few areas, and I've reread different areas of the book to clarify things. And I do think it's important that these clarifications and corrections are made. It's not like it's terribly wrong, but to understand the whole process a little better, which I was confused with, and it is confusing. And the bottom line, of course, there's very little known about the tall whites. I think that they got confused with what we're now talked about, the tall grays. Because in recent years, and got to remember, his sightings and contact were in 1965. You're talking about 50 plus years ago, 55, 60 years ago. So God knows what these people are up to, this species is up to, what's going on, etc. Apparently, this and many other species have been living in the very remote deserts of the United States for hundreds, if not thousands of years, which of course makes sense. These are very uninhabitable. Now, people have no idea how much public land, technically owned by the government, there is. And you just can't go out and build something somewhere. So let's go put a housing tract in there. Well, where's the electricity? Where's the water? Where's the doctors, the school system? So it's very difficult just to pop something up. And of course, this is government land. This was a bombing range, a practice range. And it is still there and, of course, still owned, as so much is, by the federal government. But let's go back to what's going on here. And I will be putting out dossiers on all of the known and slightly known extraterrestrial groups out there, because we will be making MechTech contact amulets so that you can get into psychic contact, or try to, with these different species. So we're going to go into what they can do, what their attitude is, what the dangers are, what contact, in a dossier that we will be publishing free of charge on YouTube and with links in other places. So watch for that coming up. But let's go back to this kind of corrections and clarifications we want to get into here. So he did go onto a ship. As I said, it's a huge volume, and the problem is there's so much gunk in these volumes. Meaning, I did this, I had this balloon thing. So it's not just his contact with these extraterrestrials. There's a lot of filler here, a lot of things of how he achieved so much and was so smart and so great, and everybody loved him, and interaction with other people that are non-essential to the story, that it's difficult to get through these books if you want to do it on a relatively rapid way. I really didn't want to sit there and go through that. So flicking through pages on my Kindle, you miss a lot of stuff to a degree. And I still am having trouble finding information specifically on the Nordics, the 24 teeth. Apparently, these kind of things, they're constantly running into these different species. Now, in my last lecture, I talked about the grays, which I believe he totally and completely misunderstood what was going on. And the problem with the grays is there are multi-types of grays. As I said, there are now grays that have been sighted frequently that are 6, 7, 8 feet. Well, this kind of fits in with the whites. And the whole idea is the tall whites, which claim to be more humanoid, were wearing basically suits, and it's considered that the grays are wearing suits as well. A lot of people show them in different things, but generally they're suits they're wearing. And I'm not sure whether they're actual extraterrestrials or cyborg or some sort of biological type robots, which I tend to think they are, particularly the grays. And all these other species may be to some extent. That's not what he put together, but he is a family man. He wrote this for his family and made kind of a Disney cartoon out of it. I'm not sure how much of that is true, and it seems to me, how bad. We don't really know where the tall whites come from. We think it's Arcturus, or a certain star they mention they like. and they are being called that now, the Artemis people, etc. But they never stated that. They never stated where they come from. There's very little information that they give out, and probably rightfully so. It is also that this is a very balanced and seemed to be practical species where they did not exchange military information. They exchanged some technologies. They refused to exchange military information with the Earth, and of course that's smart for them. What do you think those weapons are going to be used against? So, and they seem to be very cautious and fearful of this. But they stayed away from that. So they exchanged some sort of technology, maybe propulsion, etc. They have absolutely no healing skills and cannot heal out others. Weird. Not sure what to do. You'd think that your advancement in technologies would allow you to physically be able to handle things. No miracle cures here. I'm going to go into that in their dossier instead of repeating it here to a degree. But he did see that. They did show him some food, which was basically some sort of pudding-like thing, a nutritional pudding made from plant materials. They do not eat animals. Again, this makes sense and everything else. You're going to be carrying around farms on a ship and butchering and everything else. This is only a very primitive mentality would do that, especially when you don't need it. You get better proteins, better nutrients from plant-based. This is just a fact, whether you like your burgers or not. It also creates an attitude towards the slaughtering of species, which becomes what we have today. As long as there's slaughterhouses, there will be wars. So the whole idea and murder of each other. What's the difference? So the whole idea is that we need to understand that. So he did go on their ships and seen it. His talk of his ship is that it was like an RV. Not very much description there. The ship seemed very plain. They took him into the control area where the pilots sit, and of course, and rightfully so, and these extraterrestrials are very pragmatic, said, well, here's that. You're not going to understand any of the panels anyway, so there's no use sitting here and telling you what it is. And rightfully so. So they seem to be no-nonsense people. Why explain a computer to a caveman? You're wasting your time. So there wasn't much to show there. They did show some food. They state that they don't eat very much, but they do eat. And they eat this nutritional, again, we don't know what they need, etc. There was nothing stated that. They just eat some pudding. They apparently never ate human food. They only ate their own food. Well, that's pretty good for several reasons, and of course it's a great way, since they are smart and cautious, not to be poisoned. And they and we'll go into their dossier as well, but they're very, very cautious, and rightfully so. And let's get back into what was going on here, which seems to be very confusing. Now, apparently, and of course, this is 1965 again. I'm not sure now that we have 22 or 2,300 CIA-type organizations within the United States, and God knows what's under that. There's this whole build-up of how to deal with and all the different types of security officers and the huge amount of police and everything else that we have now. Well, back then it wasn't that much. This is 1965. This is, just when the Vietnam War was going and things were happening. It was pretty primitive. As a matter of fact, they brought computers and some primitive computers and some satellite stuff into Vietnam, and all the troops there, the military generals, also, what are you going to do with this? There's no value in war. So you got to remember this is it. But, there doesn't seem to be any organization. Contact with extraterrestrials, which apparently has been going on since the low beginning 40s, didn't seem to be any general group of stuff. Apparently, this was on an Air Force base. The Air Force were handling it. And, of course, to think that a military man knows how to do any of this stuff because they're generals is absurd. These people are less social. They don't really know how to handle groups of people. The military, and particularly American military, is notorious for unable to handle anything but all-out war. Look what happened in Europe, where they allowed the enemies to take over again. They did this with Japan. They do this everywhere. Yes, they can blow big giant holes in the earth and kill everybody. Well, that's not how wars are fought. What do? Wars are door to door now. They're controlling populaces. They're dealing with people and properly and making deals. Now, this is what the Romans did, and they were very good diplomats, so they're able to hold on to vast areas of territory, get tax funds with a tiny army. Now, we don't do that now, and as a matter of fact, from what I understand, the way things are happened from different people who've come out, authors, etc., the way things are done are pretty primitive. We force different countries, African and Latin in particular, force them into say, here's the carrot on the stick, make lots of money, send your kids to school, or we're going to kill you, like they've done with the Ecuadorian leadership, etc. So if you don't want to be under the control there and follow with American corporations, they just kill you. From what I understand, the Chinese are much more Romanesque. They tend to deal with people, and as such, they will take over the world as they've done already. So this is the kind of primitive. And who does this? Well, the American CIA military. That's the tactics. So are they going to be able to handle extraterrestrials? Well, I don't think so. I don't think they have done any job well. And quite frankly, anybody who looks at history understands that there really has never been a war won by American forces. 75% of the casualties in World War II of the Germans was done by the Russians. So we had very unstable, horrible generals, and we have this to today. So the Asian theater, apparently after losing almost 80% of the American army, was able to use the nuclear bomb because they didn't have any troops left and subdued Japan supposedly. But again, the pressure on Japan was coming from China and Russia, not the goofball Americans. Well, we need to understand that's history. So the whole idea is bringing in military people and think they have any social skills whatsoever to deal with very advanced and different people is the joke of all jokes. So the point is, I'm not sure what happened in any of this. What happens is secrecy kicks in, nobody gets any benefits, and we're at where we're at now. The military gets all these benefits, builds their intergalactic crafts, their anti-gravity machines, and does whatever they do with them, which generally don't seem to be nothing good. So let's understand that as well. So, but there's very little details. He didn't get any much intelligence information. After all, he's so smart and such a genius, but he has no inquisitive factors. He didn't really get into anything inquisitive. He didn't push them to where they come from. He didn't push them. I mean, you've got some very, quote, little answers. Yes, we believe in the golden rule. Okay, you believe in gods. What do you believe in? None of this goes into any detail. There's nothing intellectual going on here. He claims that he was living in a high state of fear and just making. Well, it is possible. Certainly, this is one of the most fearful things you're ever going to do. So, but very little information is gained in whatsoever, and they don't seem very forthcoming. They don't want to talk about where they come from. Yet there are passages again where they ask the U.S. military to make certain bases on planets, which they could then use as stopover bases. And of course, I guess they were going to pay with giving them technology. So there was a kind of understanding. What he knew and not is a whole nother game. Apparently not. So this was a place where they were trying to establish, but going back to what I was saying before, there doesn't seem to be a group of people who work with extraterrestrials. I'm assuming today there is. I certainly know there are military groups that respond to extraterrestrial activities to clean up, possibly protect the aliens themselves, or to pick up anything, or even to defend against them if the need be. And there is a British group, apparently, who is actively resisting certain hostile aliens, which was reported by a military person. And I'm assuming there are American ones doing the same. Not everybody is chummy, and I don't know why you would. Humans are scum. So, and we got to understand that extraterrestrials are what? Scum. Oh yeah, they've been around 1,000 years. That makes them better? Well, some things that age don't get better with age. And if things get too old, they turn bad. Even a great wine, if it's too old, can turn bad. So a lot of things over time don't get better, they get worse. And being technologically advanced doesn't mean anything. Most technologically advanced societies are more cruel than more basic societies because they have now created their own reality, their own ethics, not following, quote, the intergalactic golden rules. So when we get into all that, we need to do this. Okay, so he went inside the ships. He saw all this stuff. He got very bad information, just little bits of it, and that's about it. So they do eat. They eat kind of this pudding. The ships are kind of boring. He knows nothing about them. And what would he? I mean, you got to remember, this is pre-Star Trek, the original series. You wouldn't know what a spaceship looks like. There's very little information prior to that. We're talking about, equipment, and I don't think he knew much about fighter planes or was trained as a pilot either. None of this he had, so it wouldn't even be 1965 criteria jet planes, which would be sophisticated at that time. This is when computers were the size of entire floors on a building. They were humongous. So everything was huge, and all this technology. 1960. People don't understand how primitive compared to the toys we have now. 1965 was. Understand that. So it's not his fault entirely. You see it. You don't have pictures. You don't have drawings. He didn't do any of this stuff. So he has no record of it whatsoever. I'm not sure what was going on. I think the idea to write this book, if it is real, came to him as something he was leaving his children, as I've said before. This was supposed to be for his grandchildren. It's kind of written as a kiddie story. And it's also written, and this is what I observed going back again, it's written as a novel, and he states this initially. He is writing down what he thinks the aliens said. Well, there's a big danger here. I didn't catch that initially, but the different extraterrestrials he had contact with, the teacher and other ones that he was friendly with, he's writing down their conversations, which he was not part of. Now, was he getting this telepathically from them? But he's writing it down as a conversation. They're talking to their children, and he's getting that information. They trusted him. They figured he was, for a human, trustworthy and not going to hurt them, which they're extremely concerned with, which I guess is pretty smart. What do humans do? Fight and kill. What else have they done? What? Build a statue that looks like a woman holding a torch? A giant phallic symbol in Paris? What the hell have they ever done? And what do we have to show for anything? Zero. So we got to understand all that is an actual fact of what is going on here with this. But so that's a problem which I just found out after going back and reading things. And there's throughout his books there are passages like this. Only his last book on the Greys is written like a book you would expect to write, and he was forced to do that after becoming very public. So it's a book describing what's happening. It's a book talking about extraterrestrials as you would expect them, and his conclusions on all of his last book is all wrong. He doesn't understand what's going on and how things are happening whatsoever. Now, again, very few people have seen these tall whites unless they've morphed into the now tall grays, which I think they have. So all of that needs to be understood, that that's exactly what is going on with this particular contact here. But let's go back into what he was offered. So here's what the generals told him. And of course, I did misstate he had no rank. He was given what would be considered, he got 3 additional stripes. I'm assuming this was some sort of sergeant rank. So he was given higher rank, and I'm assuming the pay that came with that. I mean, that's what you do in the military. If you don't get rank in the military, additional. And I knew a guy, the cowardice, most scumbucket person you would ever want to meet, a guy named Keith Watlington, who was a traitor to the organization, who was in the Army for 8 years and was still a private. And that was because he was a giant screw-up. There's no way you can stay in the military for 8 years and still stay a private unless you've been busted, because that's what you're promised. They keep you in line. That's how your money goes up and everything that goes with it. Now, we do need to understand that. So he was given these stripes and everything else, and again, the book is full of, for his grandkids, all his wonderful deeds. all the great things he did, how smart he was, how everybody thought he was a genius. And it gets to be a little obnoxious to the point that when you state all this, and that he had such a great IQ, so high, sort of that. But he couldn't figure out to take camera pictures, he didn't write things down, and he didn't make any kind of drawings. I don't know if he never expected to use this information or not, but he did decide to leave it for whatever reason to his children, grandchildren, who he has numerous amounts, which I've quoted in other lectures. So, got this huge family. I believe it was 6 children. He's got all these grandchildren, and of course, he's writing these books at a time when he's unemployed and needing money. Now, we do need to note that. Now, is that good because that motivated him to write it down and put it together as we have today, just giving us this? If he was fat and sassy, would he do anything? No. People don't do things unless they're motivated. So that's not necessarily a criticism, but it also means that he's written this book with a great author's freedom to write what he wants and to make it interesting. Of how great he was for his grandchildren. I did this, I saved alien babies, I saved this guard's life, etc., etc. It's all in there. I'm a genius, everybody loves me. I got this, I got that. Okay, so this is all throughout that, and hey, I'm a person that says, look, if it's real, state it. Why not? Why shouldn't you toot your own horn? But, I mean, it's to a point where these are kind of fictitious type statements for a select audience that he wants to tell how great he was to his children who want to read it. The other thing is having lots of stories about kids flying around and everything else fits into a type of literature that children want to read. They want to, what did the children do, Granddaddy? They had children? Ooh, what did they do? They played? And they actually played with a human? Well, this kind of adds up to a kiddie's book. I mean, it would be a great kiddie book. I played with aliens. Hey, that's a good idea out there, all you movie stars that make 18, 25-page books, which are basically all pictures with a line underneath that says something. So this would be a great thing. I played with aliens. Boy, you could read that tonight to your kids. So the whole idea is that all of this is quite fascinating, but fits into, here's a children's book that he's turning this into. And who is the hero? Well, he's the hero who does everything everybody likes. He also states that the generals told him that if it wasn't for him, he wouldn't got his 3rd star, and that he has moved this communication with the extraterrestrials ahead 20 or 30 years because he was able to befriend them, which nobody else could. Well, nobody else in the military could because of their horrible way of doing things. I mean, here they are, they take average people of some note, send them out to this post and say, here you go, man. Go for it. Here's your beer. Oh, really? It doesn't seem to be a rhyme and reason of the people they put out there. And while they did test people, apparently psychologically, they weren't looking for people in this. They didn't put intelligence agents out there and prepare them. They took the average Joe who apparently had some personality, which most military don't, put them out there, and then all that happened when you got ghosts flying around all the time and relatively hostile aliens that certainly aren't trying to make you their buddies, they just ran out of there screaming. Well, is that surprising? The fact that he was the special one for this, and had the personality barely, is interesting. And of course, certainly, why wouldn't you put somebody in there who was more secure, an officer, a sub-officer, whatever you want to call the bozo military way of doing things. But as I said, 1965, they didn't have the kind of, even though the CIA has been in operation since the end of World War II. So there's 20 years worth of intelligence agencies active there. And God knows all the other ones there. So intelligence and contact with extraterrestrials wasn't new. It was going on in the 40s, and Eisenhower made contact. So where are the people that should be doing what he's doing? And why would you put the average enlisted guy out there? I just don't understand that. You certainly would try and find other people, but we know from the remote viewing program done in the 70s and 80s that they picked the stupidest idiots you could possibly get. Well, of course, that's the military anyway. You look under the dictionary under moronic turds. There's a picture of the military. So the whole idea is they took the average guys and put them in the Stargate program. A lot of people who were hostile to the program. I guess they had to get rid of these guys because nobody really liked them. So they stuck them in the worst program they could find, otherwise known as remote viewing. So again, is that unusual? Well, not really. I mean, that's par for the course. That's why the military really hasn't won any decisive wars since, never really. 1776, they didn't win either. The military was traitored by the Congress and not paid. And of course, the British have been attacking the United States ever since. So the whole idea is that that's how it goes. But we all need to fully understand that. So it sounds ridiculous. But it's operating normal for the military. So I'm not sure it is. So the point is they just stick people out there hoping they're going to find. So he was the one that could do it. They befriended him. Matter of fact, here's again him using his author license that the teacher and several other of the tall, and it's an odd term to use, state that they loved him. That's why I fell in love with them, the teacher said, and one of the female. Now, that's a strong term, especially for a very low-level social person like Charles here, who lives in the land of make-believe, the land of religion and kitties and everything else. Love is a strong word. And I almost interpreted like they said I fell in love with him. Now, this isn't love for a country or flag. It's a problem with the term love. What does love mean? There are many types of love. There's sex, physical love. After people call it love making. What a horrible word. So the whole idea is that then there's, I love my dog. I love my country. I love this tool I have. I love my car. So several of them said they fell in love with it. That's a very strong word. But of course, it's hard to, what other word would you? But, I would use more terms like, we were great friends. I call him a good friend. Love? Well, again, if you're writing a book for kiddies, you would use these kind of childish terms. So, there didn't seem to have been a love there that they wanted to be with him and did very little to keep him around. Why, if I was an extraterrestrial and it was working so much, I would go to the generals and demand that this person stay there. This is your contact. Why aren't you taking care of him? Why isn't he here? Now, apparently, some of this went on because he was offered a very juicy deal, which he wasn't interested in. And again, does that sound, now in 1920, we're in the 21st century, and we've had 1,000 TV shows and hundreds of movies of this is so exciting. And, there was a line of people wanting to go to Mars, even though most likely, and I saw a whole little television show on the guy, well, I want to go, I'm an artist, I'm so fascinated, I want to see, it's a dead planet with nothing, and you want to give up your entire family and what you believe in to go to a dead rock and to see people you have, it's like being in a foreign country, you can't speak the language with all the freaks out there for eternity. You want that? Well, it's a fantasy based on TV shows. I think it's going to be Star Trek-y. So, life ain't Star Trek-y, and that's an hour and you're back in your comfy chair eating your burgers. You're not going to do that on Mars. So the whole idea is that the ignorance of this, and of course people lined up around the corner to go to Mars to perish. You ain't getting back, not with the technology they offer in Tinker Toy World. But all we know from this and everything else, as I've said for years, of course we have intergalactic travel. This has been verified by Barry Taft, the famous Los Angeles parapsychologist who worked with all sorts of black projects and with the Skunk Works of Lockheed, who stated that they had ships like this. So, which is always overlooked, and of course it can't be verified, and the guy who said is retired. He's probably dead by now, and of course that's how it all works. So as we go through these things, we need to quite understand it. But there's an awful lot of author license going on here. He's written these books as a novel initially. He changed names and other things, claiming that the information in it is all real, but the names were changed to protect the innocent, like Jack Webb says. So the whole idea is that that makes sense to a degree, but he's writing this from the perspective of people of a novel. They said this. He's using the term love. Does an alien know what love is? Do we know what love is? I don't think so. I don't think a human knows what love is. What is it? People have a bizarre understanding of this whole term, and I don't think anybody has any concept of what it is. It's pretty much as elusive as God. And these are two things. I know what love is. I know what God is. It's in the Bible. So the whole idea is that all of that stuff out there is terms that are not fully understood and to a large extent are very cultural and are certainly very racial when you're talking about extraterrestrial races, regardless of how semi-similar they are. Just societies are radically different on this planet. The difference culture in, let's say, England compared to Swahili or in the jungles of Africa or Asian traditions is radically different, and people think different. Yes, they all have babies and houses and cars and all that, but that's those gross things add up to nothing of similarity ultimately. People talk different, they act different, they have different senses of humor. It's radically different. So, and that's why people group together. Foods, attitudes, the way people function and think are very racially and culturally based. So we need to understand that. So he's writing this as a novel, and he's telling us what they're thinking, and I don't think this was broadcast to him, even though apparently they can do that. And there's no mention it was broadcast to him. He's writing it like a novel. And of course, he's wonderful. He's great. Everybody loves him. The generals wouldn't have been generals with extra stars if he didn't talk to the aliens. And they were so smart that he just threw people out there. He starts to infer that he is superhuman and special with what happened to him. Now, I'm going to get into this as well, because as I said, I went over this stuff. You got to tell you, these are 5 volumes. I could spend hours and hours talking about them, and I don't think people care to a large degree. These are pretty long in themselves, and probably hardly anybody's listening to what I'm saying right now. They probably clicked off already. Where's the giant toads? So the whole idea is that these types of things need to be noted. And they're a very strange group, and they are very emotional, again, going against the Spock-like understanding. Now, we also have to understand that Spock is a unique character that was developed by Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy came out with Spock, even though it was a character created by Gene Roddenberry. But people don't understand that the actors in these shows hone their characters. Roddenberry did not have very complete characters written down. But of course, it's up to the actor as they play it in the situation. Now, Leonard Nimoy made Spock and made this iconic character. Just as Klingons were never written into the Star Trek original script. Gene Roddenberry never came up with Klingons. The producers of Star Trek says, look, we need conflict. We need bad guys. Let's put in these Klingon guys. Roddenberry was kind of a doofus from what I could see, and a corrupt ex-cop, but had a world view of candy canes and sugar plums, thinking the world would be wonderful. Strange. The show was great because of everybody's input, as life tends to be. This person does this actor creates that. A matter of fact, if you look at the original pilot for Star Trek, is quite a different character, Spock. Spock itself was a very emotional guy. He talked like this, Captain, we're in trouble. Well, what happened to Captain? What's logical? Well, that was created later. Now, Leonard Nimoy stated why he did that. The original pilot, which had, I forget, Tab Hunter or Tab something, played the captain in the pilot. Now, he was a very low-level actor. He interpreted things in the macho, controlled attitude, meaning that if Spock talked, yes, Captain, is it logical? Okay, Spock, I understand. You would have had this logical thing going. Bad TV. Now, when William Shatner came on there, he added the Shatner touch, making the captain into this kind of middle ground person who thought things out, who was well trained, but will punch you in the face and didn't have a problem with emotions. So the whole idea of Spock played it emotional, then you're getting back to the same problem that the pilot would have had. So Spock turned into this balancing off the captain and his genius acting understanding to be this very opposite character. And, of course, became the most character. Well, I always, as a child, enjoyed Captain Kirk. Everybody was saying how wonderful Spock was. The Robotron, pointy-eared, which I found no appeal to. But that's typical in everything I do, which is opposite regular society. He was the star of that show. So everyone needs to understand that. So as we move on to that, to have all these things. So let's pre all this stuff. And that's one good thing. But he is writing this almost like it's a Hollywood script for kids to read, and he is wonderful. So the generals love him, everybody loves him, and so forth. But there is no more. It's so outrageous that the military would act in such an imbecilic way that it rings true. As I said, look at the remote viewing. The kind of little turds in the remote viewing program using the trainers, which are these floppy gay guys. Okay, we're going to teach you remote viewing. The goofball scientists, the little loser guys that fell out of helicopters, little tiny turds, the egotistical maniacs. I mean, the whole remote view program was made up of a bunch of misfits and freaks. And let's not talk, Ed Dames, yeah, the Martians are everywhere. They're going to invade any time. I'm a military officer. We need to point our guns to the sky. They're coming. I'm Major Ed Dames. Help us. Help us. This is the guy running the program. The guy's a complete jerk. Every year it's the same thing with Major Ed Dames. They're coming. Run, man, run. Yeah, we know. Well, we should run if you're in the military, or the military is going to handle anything. So, this false respect we have for the military is absurd. And, of course, like everything in the world, there are courageous, good people there as well. And, of course, they're very misused, poor, and, they're living in a fantasy world themselves. How great all these special forces are, we just don't know. Obviously, they're qualified, dedicated people. But, they're murdering innocents for no reason. Fun, it's my job, Yeah, that's what they all say, of course. So, it's always your job. That's why I do it. It's a job. Well, why did you take the job? Well, because I like killing people. It's fun. Okay. So the whole idea is that we need to understand all these things. So it gets to be, when you read these books of how great he is, how smart he is, how everything happened because of him, yet there doesn't seem to be anything overly. Now, he was given the run of the base, complete freedom, everything else, which makes sense. He was given minor rank. You think they would have put him to the highest they could, but maybe 3 stripes in the Air Force. He I don't know if he was a master sergeant. He may have been a sergeant. I don't know if he made it a master, but I guess that's the highest you can go as an enlisted man. But there weren't any special people brought in. Nobody was brought in to help him. You think they'd bring in somebody to train him, finding somebody that could be interested in that so they could work together and he would feel more secure there, and he could bring them in to work with the extraterrestrials so there could be more people, someone who intended on staying in the military, which he really didn't. So what happens is this. So after his 2 years, and he did go on the ships, they talked a little. The aliens loved him. Of course, he knows nothing about them. He makes no comments, as I mentioned in my other lectures, about the physicality of the women, the sexuality of the women. They got a bunch of kids, so there's humping going on. if they hump. And I would like to know, do they hump? How do they produce children? Apparently, if they're humanoid, it means they have that. They don't really show breasts on the women from what I can see to a degree. Some of the sexier interpretations are, and they're good-looking babes, which I find questionable as well. And he makes the women, again, for his many female grandchildren, very female. They like makeup and dresses and other things. Well, maybe they could. Maybe the universe of women are all the same and have similar likes and dislikes. Well, that wouldn't be overly unusual, would it? And I would think, either cultures would reject all the garbage of expensive clothing or kind of embrace it. After all, there's got to be a physical attraction look that must be intergalactic. How do they get together? What do they find in it? What is it based on? Earth beings, it's all based on what things look. There are major fetishes, breasts, bottoms, all the things that would attract people to get together. And there's a huge sexual reality to humans that they breed like crazy. And this is all because of a bizarre, over-exaggerated sexual compulsion. Did they have that? So all of this is not answered, but they loved him to the point that they almost killed him. So, because they are so emotional and so fearful, and I'm not sure why they're fearful. Did they have run-ins with humans? Well, certainly you want to be cautious of this kind of psychotic evil race that's called a human. Obviously, look at the history. I'm sure they were shot at and they went back and saw pioneers and all the things that went on. They must know about the wars and everything else that went on. Yet there's little talked about that. There isn't any talk about how crazy and violent you people are. Stay away from me. It's just the fact that stay away from me. I don't trust you. Well, again, I find these holes so big you could drive a 747 through them. Maybe two. Side by side. So a lot of these things don't. But he's not inquisitive. He's not asking anything. And that's a problem in two ways. Because the less information you give, the less you can get caught. So it's just that, we're following the whole story. I give you bits and pieces, but let's not get into the details because that could be conflicting or found out to be a lie. So we know none of this, which are all the normal things that everybody would get into. And he's so wonderful and great and everything else. But he did approach one of these, and they shot him and almost killed him. But it says that he knew what to do, where to lay on the ground doing this. So, apparently, and I won't get into the whole process of it, but apparently they somehow affect a chemical makeup, and you kind of bleed out through the nose, apparently. And he went through all of this, but apparently was kind of superhuman. Knew some. Again, here's the little things that are in this book that, you could probably read these 10 times and get 10 different little extras from them. There's a lot of dense material put into a lot of balloon raising. So he almost died, and they didn't help him one iota. What? They have no capacities to heal themselves very well and no capacity to heal others. So the whole human and even in general physical energetic systems, the physicality in terms of the medicine and medical of this species is almost non-existent. Apparently when they do have certain diseases and treat people there. This happened to one of the guards that he saved. Again, he saved a guard who was sick from something, who just fell on the ground and nobody noticed him. And they took off, and he ran at the ship saying, "Hey, Bert here, he's on the ground. He's sick. Come and get him." And they almost killed him because they thought he was attacking the ship. Now, this is pretty stupid to think an individual guy who has no weapons whatsoever. I don't think he even had a pocket knife. There's no weapons. He never talks about getting weapons, having handguns, rifles, or bigger weapons, hand grenades. After all, he's in the military. And after all, this is when the Air Force apparently was in combat. So this is not, would be unusual. But he has none of this. He's running at the plane, waving at it, and let's torture him, get that fucker. What? Not to mention the Obviously, they had no fear of the American military taking reprisals for murdering their people. Um, so apparently, this guard was sick. He didn't get zapped conveniently. Of course, they loved him. Um, and he was taken into the ship and healed. And he saw him later operating. And he had some sort of disease or other things. Apparently, they're not that well. They live 800 years, but they heal very slowly. This is stated throughout the books, and their medicine seems to be primitive. They can't take care of their... they grow so fast and so big, their bone structure and so forth can't handle it too well. But I guess it handled it for 900 years, so how are we supposed to interpret that? And apparently this guy was cured of whatever disease he had and brought back within a few weeks when he was noticed yet again. So I'm not sure. Obviously, they cured this guy. He was ready to go back to guard duty within. So they, not saying, again, that's a contradictory, and, medical science is something that we're all looking at. So basically, he laid on the ground bleeding out. I don't know, it appeared hours and hours and days. They just left him there. They told him not to pick him up. So he's sitting on the dirt in the middle of the desert and wasn't taken to a hospital or anything else. Basically made it back to his little hut and survived it all. The whole story is pretty bizarre. But they did nothing to help him after they shot him with one of these weapons because they were intimidated. Even though they knew him and he had never aggressively went after them, he had no weapons, they shot him to the point. But he was special and this is what goes through the book, that there's something weird going on. I think that he thinks he's an extraterrestrial himself. There's some weird stuff going on here that doesn't make sense. So he was able to survive, and within 24 hours was back to normal, kind of like a cartoon or a TV show. So I wonder about these things with all that. It doesn't make much sense. But apparently they don't have any ways of curing humans of illnesses. And so if you're going to find these people and expect them to help in the physical medical area, that you are fat out of luck, baby. So he got by that and blah, blah, blah. I don't know if they apologized or whatever. But there still was a great concern, and they didn't. We love them, we trust them, but hey, don't get close to me, I'll beat the shit out of you. I'll kill you. And they were willing and able to kill at a drop of a hat. They all carried pencil-like, laser-destroying weapons, and were ready to use them at all time, and they constantly were protecting and guarding their people. In this manner. They apparently were able to disguise themselves and go into casinos, another incident I'll talk about here, before getting into what the military offered him. But one of the women he knew went into a casino, and he was there as well. And but throughout the casino were scattered guards that were in black uniforms, almost very much like the Men in Black. They all carried weapons, and they all were there. So there's about 6 guards that went in with her, and they were there watching her gamble. And she was able to know what every card was in the deck. So she was able to perceive the cards, to see through them, so to speak, and could identify them. Very interesting for others. Be part of the dossier we talk about their capacities. But they definitely did go out in groups, and they were armed, and they were ready to take deadly action against someone at any time. Even if you're a buddy that they loved, apparently. So as I said, all this is weird. So they were very much on guard, and I don't know why. Certainly there's always times for taking action of killing people, if the need be, without having to just pull your gun and shoot somebody that you're not entirely sure if they're a threat. Apparently they don't care, and they just go back to their bases, and of course the military protects them, as the military tends to protect a lot of people that should probably be eliminated because they are a threat. I'm not saying that about them, I'm just saying in general. But it certainly didn't look like the military had capacities to handle them in 1965. And as I've mentioned, they did not exchange any military technology, only information, which of course could be used for that. But they certainly didn't exchange healing information. So it was more of a technology information, I'm assuming, about propulsion systems, etc. But there are some strange things here that he talks about you find here and there. But, so here's what happened with the military. After this went on here, one of the generals approached him and said what a great guy he was and how he thanked him for his additional stars and offered him a commission. Offered him a commission. He said, well, we'll send you to the Air Force Academy. You'll learn everything. You'll become an officer, and we'll bring you back here to run this area as the commander. We'll give you a what was the term he used? Bird colonel? Is that in the Air Force? But they would make him a colonel, someone who would run this division and work with these extraterrestrials, and that he could stay there for as long as he wanted. And if he didn't want to stay there after a period of time, that they'd give him a cushy air position as an officer. Flying planes somewhere, do something very simple and safe when he got tired of this. So they did absolutely. They gave him an out, because I guess if you looked at this and say, gee, I'm going to have to sit here and deal with these aliens for 30 years in my career, and I have nothing else to do, what happens if I don't want to do that? So they considered that and gave him an out. So, look, do this for as long as you want, and when you're sick of it, we'll put you somewhere else in a cushy job, which is pretty much everything in the Air Force is a cushy job, particularly once Vietnam was over. Because as I said, apparently there were forward war bases in the Air Force, which I was unaware of. But once that stopped, there basically wasn't any kind of forward air bases. And of course, there's a lot of very cushy jobs. To a large extent, the Air Force is a giant welfare system in the government where they take these kind of more intelligent military types and you go in the Air Force. So all of this is something that needs to be understood. So he was given that offer, what seems like a very good offer. Not to him, and maybe not. Maybe it isn't. I mean, you're going through some pretty traumatic stuff. He really doesn't know what he wants to do. He claims, even though he didn't have a relationship at this time that we can note, that he was homesick. And even though he stated he didn't have much of a home life and came from a relatively low middle class farm family. He claims he came from a poor family. Well, they couldn't afford college, but it seems to me that they were farming a fair amount of acres. So who knows what the money factor is there. But he said he was homesick and that he just wanted to complete his military obligations and then go to school on the military bill. And this is what he'd been saying from day one. And, of course, this is when he was given this, of course, in our time would look fantastic. You got to remember that, this is before all, I keep saying, before all the Star Trek-y hundreds of shows, Star Wars, etc., which glamorized everything, and the reason why these films tend to be made. So this was just something that was really spooky and something, while he enjoyed his job because of the freedom of it, meaning he had no supervisors, other people handling him, etc., for a military position, what he was doing and being on his own, which he preferred to, he enjoyed. But it's certainly not living out in the middle of the desert somewhere on a bombing range, setting up balloons and having to deal with consistent ghosts of all nature was not something that he was really interested in. He was pushed there. He wasn't asked to. He didn't volunteer. He didn't find it interesting. There were no lead-ins. There was no preparatory work. People were just thrown out there, and they all ran out of there screaming and got out on Section 8s from it. That's what everyone else that was there went through. He was the only one that could handle it, so he says. And as I said, I'm not really sure that is surprising considering this. I mean, you're just a guy out in the middle of nowhere. You have no communication. You're pitch black in the middle of the desert, and there's ghosts flying around all the time. You have to have quite a personality to accept that and say, okay. Well, he was able to get over that, and the only one that could. So they offered him all this. They offered him a commission, go to Annapolis, have this cushy job, make good money, and that he would work at this particular base. And when he didn't want to work at that base, he could get another cushy job. But he was not interested in that. And as he said, looking back at it, you'd say, well, are you crazy? But, it doesn't, just because you're getting along in a difficult situation doesn't necessarily mean that you want to stay there, or that this is something, well, yeah, I can handle it. They're okay. I don't have a problem with that. Do you want to do that all the time? So everybody thinks talk to this culture, find out about them. Real post-Star Trek-y stuff. So I'm not surprised that was the wrong decision. They also said, well, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. You've been a great guy. We're going to send you to, which is, I think, is suspicious to begin with. Why send somebody to Vietnam? We're going to send you to the big Air Force base there. It's just a giant party. You're not going to be in the war zone. It's all going to be fine. Why go there? There are Air Force bases all over the world. Particularly at that time, he could have been sent to Japan, which was pretty civilized. There's England. There's Germany. Italy, France. I mean, the Americans have bases all over the place. For that matter, you could put him out at Guam, which is a beautiful island. Why did they send him to Vietnam? I wonder about the sincerity of that. And I think this is another typical backstabbing, untrustworthy military move. So, we'll send you there. Don't worry about it. It's a cushy job. Well, there's lots of cushy jobs. For that matter, they could have sent him to Hawaii anyway. They were going to Section 8 him and send him to Hawaii anyway. Why not send him to Hawaii? For a reward. Everybody wants to go to Hawaii. And everybody else went to Hawaii that went out on a Section 8, so it appears. No, they didn't say that. Well, we're going to send you to Vietnam, but don't worry about it. This is a fun part of Vietnam. And you're not going to see any action. You can do your remaining 2 years and then go on and do what you want. Well, I think that was very naive. And it turned out to be naive. He went to Vietnam. So he turned this down because he just wanted, I'm homesick. I just want to do my duty. I want to get out, get education, and go into the real world and not necessarily stay in the military. Well, that's, not unusual. I haven't met too many people that wanted to stay in the military. The military are assholes, and they run a terrible operation. I've heard nothing but great criticizing from any kind of person who's been in the military, and very few people want to stay there. So, not overly surprising. And this was not really what he wanted to do. I mean, he joined the military so he could get an education like so many people do on the GI Bill. So it's not overly surprising. What I think is surprising is why from day one did they want to send him into a combat zone regardless of how far the bullets are away from you. It's a combat zone. It's not a good one. Everyone knows Vietnam is a giant quicksand hole of manure that there's no way they're going to ever win it. And a political soup on top of it. So the military always said in Vietnam that they couldn't win because of the politics. And of course, this was part of the problem there. But I don't think they could win in general. You can't fight these kind of wars the way they want to do it. This is a civil war of people who are at war, similar to Afghanistan, for 20 or 30 years fighting the French. Before that, they fought the Japanese. I mean, this is a place, regardless you want to think about Vietnam, where is equivalent to Afghanistan of being invaded all the time. Vietnam was also oftentimes considered the rice bowl of the Orient. It produces a lot of food, so it was a place that was coveted. There also was massive Red Chinese troops in Vietnam fighting there. So I'm not sure they could ever kill enough Vietnamese because they'd bring the Chinese in. And these were noted by troops, and there was a huge amount of very tall Asians there. And those were, of course, all the Chinese that were brought in. And that goes on and on with all that stuff there. Of course, nobody knows anything about Vietnam anymore, and I'm sure we'll have Hiltons and Sheratons there and going to the beaches soon. So as we all understand this, we need to understand where he's going. So he didn't want to do that. And being kind of naive and trusting the people he just got, the general that he just got got his fourth or third star from, who was so grateful. This was a setup to kill him. I'm convinced of it. Now, apparently, at that time, they didn't go out and just kill you directly. They figured, well, we'll put him in one of these horrible things. His chances of surviving in 2 years in Vietnam is going to be pretty remote in a forward air base where they're constantly under attack. Apparently, he got commendations for resisting 35 attacks on the base. So the fact that he could get killed there when we had bodies coming home by the hundreds every week seems to me to be quite real. So he was sent there. When he got there, with his orders going to the fun base, they were immediately changed for him to go to the other one. So it wasn't his fault, but the point is, as I said, if you look back at it and thinking about this, well, why send me to Vietnam in general? I've worked hard here. I've done a lot for you. He doesn't think like this. He's a dummy with Bible verses in every chapter. Instead of say, hey, why don't you send me to Hawaii right now? Or, I've always liked tea. Why don't you send me to London? Nope. No, don't worry about it. We're going to send you to Vietnam where we can kill you anytime we want because there's nothing but a giant war going on there. And this wasn't a place which was enjoyable. I mean, they were blowing up hotels and shooting you in Saigon. You couldn't trust anybody. This was a civil war, and you were the war. And you were a target. It was notorious that children would throw teddy bears filled with hand grenades at you, or you'd be sitting there having a beer on the main street and somebody would blow it up, the restaurant. So this is how all these things go. And so it's very suspicious that he would even bring that up. But that was planned. I'm sure the generals got together and said, well, what do we do with this guy? Well, let's try and make him part of the team. If he doesn't want to become part of the team, well, we're going to have to get rid of him. He knows too much. He has all this information. We got to find a way. But we can't just tell him we're going to kill him. And of course, we're not going to just kill him. That wouldn't be cricket, would it, there? We didn't learn that in the academy. So the whole idea is that they send him to a place that has a hot zone, telling him he's not going to be in the hot zone. You're only going to be in the warm zone. Yet he was put in the red hot zone, thrown into the frying pan, hoping that he would be killed. And maybe in some perverse military, well, if he survives, well, that's fine. Then we can. Then he's earned it. But in this day and age, and the fact that he never mentions being, told, don't talk about this, sign these papers, etc. Well, that wasn't done that much back then as well, from what I understand. There's a few people who worked in these kind of situations that were never put under secrecy oath. This was before. This happened in the 70s, apparently, where you're put under secrecy oaths when you worked with people, which is very interesting. And, of course, now everybody's under a secrecy oath where you're in big, big trouble if you talk about any of this. So, we need to fully understand that. So that's exactly what happened with him here, where they sent him to that. So he did survive after that, but I wanted to clarify. They gave him this big opportunity to become an officer to kind of get Air Force welfare, but he would then have to work in this place. And they figured, hey, look, even if he stays for a couple of years, we're working with these extraterrestrials. They like him. We're going to benefit a lot. What a deal. And rightfully so. So what did they care? And they probably figured, well, once we get him in there, we'll keep him there indefinitely. And if he really does want to transfer out, we'll bring somebody else in and we'll send him to some cushy job. That's another cushy job statement that I wonder what would happen. If he didn't stay there, well, maybe he would have crashed a plane with him in it. So who knows? So again, I wanted to clarify all these things. That was the deal he was given that he turned down. I think people need to understand that. He was rewarded. He was given rank. He did have more personal contact. They loved him. He saw what they ate, their pudding mush, and what was going on there. And there is a whole bunch of things here. As I've mentioned and I've talked about in the previous lecture, his interpretations of the grays and what on there is all misinterpretations. And I tend to think that, again, he's quoting things he knows now. Well, at Roswell in 1948, we're talking about 1965 that he was in the military. I don't think he was even born in 1948. So he's talking about stuff like, well, I knew this stuff. He didn't say any of this, but this is what happened in Roswell. Where did he get that information from? He certainly wasn't an inquisitive guy. I don't know if Roswell in 1965 was much of anything known. So he wasn't looking into Air Force records. He had no access to it. He had no interest. He didn't even ask the aliens anything. So the whole idea is that he got nothing there. All of a sudden, he's an expert on the Greys, and they transferred him over there. Well, why would they transfer him to start communicating with Greys when he had such a relationship with the Tall Whites? And that was the big deal. Why would they move him away? It doesn't even make any sense there. But of course, it's military again. Maybe they figured that he could befriend the Greys, which they were having trouble befriending as well. And there was a huge child abduction ring going on there, which the Greys were ahead of, including the abduction of hybrids and all kinds of humans, as well as, of course, again, there's the Grey Kitties, and they're driving machines, they're hot rods, and they're crashing them, and everything else. Ooh, yes, Granddaddy, tell me about the hot rods and how the kids crash them. I'm going to be driving in a couple of years. So, I mean, this is what happens here, which is a real problem. A real problem that he's writing a novel here for his grandkids. And there's an awful lot of author license going on here. He's also, as he said, writing from the perspective of the people, commenting about him and how great he was. Well, again, that's a novel thing. Where does that begin and end? You have to be very disciplined and not living in a comic book world, and I think he is. He also wants to clarify to everybody of how great Jesus is by putting all these Bible quotes and thanking God. So you got to remember the kind of infantile mind this guy has and where he's stuck. So to think that he wouldn't talk about the Greys and their hot rods crashing all the time. And of course, that's what Roswell was just a bunch of teenagers who got their hot rods and crashed them when they were street racing. Come on. So, I mean, if we're going to get outrageous conclusions, and he gets all of the Grey information wrong, he comes up, conclusions are wrong, based on something that was 20 years before he was even in the military, and basically happened before he was born, and he has no investigative rank to go and pull records or anything about it, to make the conclusions he's done, because this is what happened. He went around in lectures, and these lectures, they asked him, which were very popular and has been for the last 10 to 20 years, well, what about Roswell? What do you know about that? What about those crashes? What about those people? Which really, he should have stated, me know nothing. I don't know, man. I don't get it. Not my job. So, that's what he should have stated. But now he was forced to, and if you want to continue to have lectures and sell another book, well, you're going to have to talk about the Greys. And that's exactly what he did. Because basically, he has no information. He'd have to make up a whole bunch of information about the Tall Whites to fill in all the things we don't know about them. And the bottom line is that he didn't do any of that. He didn't write a conclusive book describing them, telling them what they are, filling in all the things I brought up questions about. It's a very bad contact, getting very little information about them, their society structure, and what they do. A lot of this didn't want to be shared, but a lot of it was shared if he would have pursued it. After all, they loved him. And the whole idea is that we need to take that into consideration. What's going on here? But I did need to clarify those areas. He was given a great opportunity, which he turned down. I find it very strange that such a valuable, advanced person, unless they were really trying to get rid of him, would they send into a military zone after they promised him not to. They knew that would happen. Whatever that person he talked to, and it would be very typically military, well, it had nothing to do with me, I tried to do this, was turned over to other people to eliminate him. So, and this is the way they would do that, because he is a security risk. I don't know any other way to do it. Of course, we can go back to the general military incompetency, which they're known for. The old joke, military intelligence. There is no such thing. So the whole idea is that this is what happens with these types of situations for us to look at it. But looking at the bigger picture and the fact that here's a guy who seems to be leaning towards a little bit too much towards celebrity and money making, and that all this transpired because he was out of work for a year or two, even with his big degrees, and they needed to make money. And that's, of course, basically what, and they didn't hide the fact. His wife said that you're unemployed now, let's publish these. And she saw that, and she edited it, I believe, with her family or friends. They edited all the books, and there seems to be a very female touch to these novels, and that's exactly what they are. And there's a lot of things added into it for the kiddies, for the females out there. What do we want to know? But typically female, there's no overt sexuality in it. Makeup, dresses, and other things, the kind of things that females like. So the whole idea is very interesting that all of this is put together. So this story in general is just that. There's no other verification of tall whites of this time. There's no other people talking about them who have come in contact with them. As I said, they kind of blend into the tall grays now. So this is the only information we have on the tall whites from Arcturus, or at least near that star, because that's a star, is from him, and the information we have in these books, which you could go through and pick out. And as I said, the dossier on them will go into what their practical abilities, strengths, weaknesses, and dangers are. But in general, that's all we have. And as he said, this is the problem when you try and extend a career, you try and do things you can't, or, like old movie stars and singers that want to sing when they're 85 years old and disgrace themselves. Instead of saying, hey, look, I did that, that's it. But you never, you keep going on until you actually crow. Well, he wanted to put together another book. Now, his last book came out in 2012, so it's been a long time now. You're talking about almost over 10 years now of not coming out with a new book, and I guess that was his last hurrah. So I don't know if he's doing anything else. I don't know if he's still going to UFO conferences. I'm sure he is. Of course, nothing's happening now because of the problems going on at this particular date. And of course, this film was made of him as well, which I'm assuming he was paid for, but it is a documentary, so I don't know how much he was paid. But he did make money here as well, regardless if it's a few thousands or several tens of thousands. And of course, it is a good publicity for his books. I bought his books because I saw the film, and I'm sure I'm one of tens of thousands. So I'm sure he made a lot of money from this film. And that has to be taken into consideration in terms of not if it's real or not, but how much Hollywood has been weaved in. So how much Hollywood license of making it fun, interesting, dangerous, sexy, etc. has been added into something to make it more interesting to the public, which Hollywood is notorious for. But writers are notorious for this. I'm sure if his wife looked at the cold, cruel, hard notes that he wrote, that she said, well, this isn't interesting. We're going to have to put in women things. We're writing this for children as well. Why don't we going to put things that children are interested in? So, and we got to make it exciting. There's got to be danger. All of this had to be taken in consideration and done. So this should give you a good, excellent idea. I spent a lot of time on this because this is all about the tall whites and we don't know anything else. The dossier is very important that we'll be coming out with next. This is something that you will use as you use our MechTech ambulance to connect to these extraterrestrials, which are highly telepathic, trying to get information from them, trying to have them help empower you on a high consciousness psychic level, which we're going to do with many different extraterrestrials. They can do this. All the extraterrestrials can do it, and it has been noted in the past they used to do this. So this is one of those huge practical keys which I'm all about and what IGOS is all about. How do we use things in a practical nature? I don't need philosophy. I don't need guidebooks to the universe. I need to have practical tools to apply to my life and those who are involved with IGOS to improve their lives, to go up to higher consciousness levels for self-survival and for higher level understanding in general. The goal of IGOS is to master the material realm. Well, you can only do so much. You need to have extreme abilities. These entities, these extraterrestrials, and many others have all types of abilities. They have transferred it other. We have a lot of documentation of people being empowered by these in an indirect and even direct fashion. Uri Geller states he was zapped with a beam and had all these abilities after that. Others have had skills given to them and opened up very strong psychic pathways because just by the telecommunication with them, because to communicate with you on a high level, they have to open up your psychic centers that we work so hard at IGOS to do for you. So all of this is very important, and that's what this is all about ultimately. Ultimately, this is all about empowerment and how we can contact these extraterrestrials on a safe, sane level and get some sort of empowerment. So stay tuned for the dossier and more extraterrestrial information coming soon.